In just 3 minutes, one sentence from Donald Trump lit a national fuse. If she beats me in this IQ challenge, I'll resign the presidency. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She stood there stone-cold silent, gripping a folder that could bury a president and burn down a $13 billion betrayal. So here's the question. What did she unleash that made the most powerful man in America forget how to speak on live TV? At exactly 8:00 p.m. Eastern, every major network in America snapped to the same shot, a gleaming presidential seal polished like a trophy, centered above a stage that looked more like a courtroom than a press briefing. The lights were too perfect. The flags didn't move, and the air it buzzed like static before a lightning strike. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and louder than they should have been. Donald Trump stepped into frame. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just locked eyes with the camera like he was staring down an opponent across a poker table, chips stacked, high hands steady. If you beat me in this IQ challenge, he said, voice smooth like glass about to crack live, here in front of the American people, I will resign the presidency. The room didn't breathe. Not the press, not the staffers, not even the cameras. Somewhere in Chicago, a bartender dropped a glass. In Miami, a veteran stood up from his couch. In D.C., cable news hosts scrambled to cut their monologues mid-sentence. Trump let the silence hang, like he wanted the words to ferment, turn into something stronger than just politics, something nuclear. I've built skyscrapers, he continued, pacing slow, like a showman in a circus tent. She's built Twitter threads. Let's see who's really qualified. It was arrogant, it was petty, and it was perfect. For the crowd he'd flown in hand-picked loyalists in red ties and white pearls, it was blood in the water. They howled like it was a boxing match. But Jasmine Crockett, she didn't even blink. She sat front row, alone. No staff, no lawyer, no notes. Just her in a thick, worn-out red folder, resting on her lap like a sleeping bomb. Trump turned to her, leaning slightly, eyes narrowing. What do you say, Congresswoman? Still nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't smirk, didn't raise an eyebrow. She looked at him the way a surgeon might look at a man boasting about his pain tolerance, quiet, calm, and already holding the scalpel. Behind the cameras, someone at MSNBC whispered, "Why isn't she answering?" But on the other end of the Capitol, in a quiet office with 6 monitors and 1 blinking terminal, Jasmine's aide wasn't asking questions. She was watching numbers move, millions of dollars quietly funneled from a veteran pension fund to a company no one had heard of, Aegis Liberty. On another screen, an archived page vanished from the Federal Register in real time. Executive Order 4021A erased. 1 sentence, 1 bet, 1 missing document. And Jasmine hadn't said a word. Trump, growing restless, tried again. This isn't just about brains, folks. It's about who can lead. Who has the guts? Who deserves to be up here? I'm not afraid of her fancy college or her activist friends. I'm standing right here. Let her come take it. The crowd roared like it was a pep rally. But something in the air shifted. Cold crept into the room, not from the AC, but from Jasmine's silence. It wasn't passive. It was surgical. She slowly placed one hand over the folder. Not to open it. Not yet. Just to remind the world it was there. 3 minutes had passed. The most powerful man in the country had just wagered everything on a contest he thought he controlled. And Jasmine Crockett hadn't even stood up yet. So what was inside that red folder that made a president gamble his office before she ever spoke a single word? 3 minutes of silence turned into 6 hours of national chaos. The moment Trump's words echoed across America, "I will resign the presidency," phones exploded, cable networks glitched, and hashtags ignited like brush fires. But amid the storm, one corner of the internet went still. Jasmine Crockett hadn't spoken at the podium. She hadn't done a single interview. No press releases, no video replies. Just one post on her official X account, time-stamped 8:16 p.m. Let the country watch and listen. That was it. No hashtags, no emojis, no follow-up. And somehow it was louder than any rally Trump had ever screamed through a megaphone. In Houston, her inner circle sat frozen in a war room, dimly lit by screens and nerves. Screens filled with cable anchors asking the same question, why isn't she responding? But her team knew better. Jasmine wasn't hiding. She was staging. Her communications director, Layla, paced behind her desk fingers, white-knuckled on her phone. "You need to counter this," she urged. "He made you look like you blinked." But Jasmine didn't blink. She just turned the folder in her hands slowly like it was alive. "This isn't a chess match," she said, voice low. "It's a landmine field." And he just stepped in barefoot. Across the room, Marcus, her veteran policy advisor, was already pulling up redacted PDFs and whistleblower emails. "We still can't trace the full money trail," he muttered, "but EO 4021A is dirty, and it's personal." Jasmine nodded once. She already knew. That folder didn't hold guesses. It held names, receipts, blood. But none of that would go public, not yet. The moment wasn't ready. The crowd wasn't ready. The silence was part of the plan. Back in D.C., Trump's allies filled the void. "She's afraid," they said. "She's stalling." Tucker Carlson declared it live. She folded before the game even began. Jasmine let them talk. She watched the spin pile up like dry leaves before a storm. Watched the headlines try to write her into a corner. She didn't argue. She didn't fight the noise. She simply waited for the right breath to strike. At 2:03 a.m., her legal counsel confirmed that the Department of Veterans Affairs had processed a record number of benefit terminations in the past 60 days, nearly 38,000 cases frozen or redirected. Every one of them traced back to the same shell company her team uncovered, Aegis Liberty, registered in Delaware, banked in the Cayman Islands, tied directly to a familiar trust fund bearing the initials E.T. Trump thought she was preparing for a test. She was preparing a takedown. And as the nation buzzed louder, she went quieter, intentional, controlled, like the calm right before something ancient and devastating breaks the surface. Jasmine Crockett wasn't avoiding the spotlight. She was letting it turn toward the fuse. So when would she strike, before the crowd cheered, or right when they forgot what game they were watching? At 4:19 a.m., Jasmine's phone lit up with a two-word message from Marcus. "It's gone. No warning, no attachments. Just enough to raise every alarm inside her chest." Seconds later, Layla burst into the room holding her laptop like it was a loaded weapon. "They pulled it," she said, breath short. "Executive Order 4021A is no longer on the Federal Register. Scrubbed. Vanished." Jasmine didn't panic. She didn't even blink. She just unlocked her tablet, opened her offline archives, and found the file exactly where she'd kept it, buried behind 5 folders, backed up on 3 mirrored drives. The header was still there. Reallocation of federal pension. Holdings for strategic domestic defense investments. But it wasn't the title that mattered. It was the language buried in the third clause. Clause C7, temporary restructuring of inactive federal pensions into privately managed financial assets for deployment under Section 10A, strategic partnerships. Jasmine scrolled to the end jaw, tightening as the beneficiary line appeared. Aegis Liberty Defense Holdings, LLC. A ghost company, no contracts, no audit trail, but familiar, too familiar. Her voice was calm when it came. "Check the routing code." Marcus moved fast. 2 taps. A pause. Then his face dropped. "Cayman Islands," he muttered. "Same sequence from the DOJ leak. This matches the ET Holdings Trust." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "Eric Trump," she whispered. "He's the front, the name, the laundering glove." It all clicked too clean, too fast. The veterans, the teachers, the janitors, anyone who'd logged decades for the government and moved into retirement, they were the funding source. Their pensions didn't disappear. They were harvested, converted into capital for a defense firm no one could audit, wrapped in fake patriotism, and handed to Trump's inner circle like candy. She scrolled to the final page. The signature sat untouched, bold, and unapologetic. Donald J. Trump, inked in black, dated 5 weeks ago. Jasmine closed her tablet slowly, her mind moving faster than her heartbeat. This wasn't just corruption. It was cold-blooded theft executed in daylight and now wiped like a browser tab. Layla looked pale. If this got out now, it would destroy him. Jasmine shook her head. Not yet. If I drop this tonight, it gets lost in the circus. She looked toward the live feed, still buzzing about the IQ showdown. He's betting the country will be too distracted by noise to notice a body buried in silence. She stood folder in hand posture, solid as steel. Let him have the spotlight. Let him talk. Let him mock. Her voice sharpened. Because the moment I speak, he won't be able to say anything ever again. Outside the building, dawn crept across the Capitol dome. Birds chirped like nothing had happened. But inside, Jasmine's team had just uncovered the kind of political crime that doesn't just end careers, it rewrites history. Trump hadn't challenged her mind. He dared her to speak before he could finish the cover-up. And now the fuse was lit, the folder was full, and the clock was running out. What kind of man bets the presidency just to hide a signature? The chamber was no longer a place for government oversight. It had become a stage drenched in spotlight, flanked with LED panels and pulsing with the synthetic buzz of an audience that didn't come to listen. It felt less like Congress and more like a game show set in Las Vegas. The banners read, "The Intelligence Summit," draped in gold trim, like a corporate seminar on ego. There were no gavels, no procedural order, just claps, cheers, and cameras. The man chosen to moderate wasn't a legal scholar nor a constitutional expert. He was a Fox News host with perfect teeth and a grin sharpened from years of spin. He welcomed the nation with the confidence of someone who knew they weren't here for truth. They were here for ratings. Tonight, he said, we finally find out who really deserves the seat of power, the man who ran the world, or the woman who tweets about it. Laughter erupted. Jasmine didn't move. She was seated stage left, deliberately placed in a chair just low enough that her head sat inches below Trump's podium. Her mic was thinner, her monitor smaller, and behind her there were no flags, just shadows. Everything about the setup screamed imbalance. But Jasmine's face stayed calm, unreadable, carved in composure. Trump, by contrast, basked in the architecture of the spectacle. He was positioned dead center, lit from above, like a biblical figure. His podium stood on a slight riser, his name engraved in gold, the presidential seal enlarged behind him like a crown. He held his chin high, scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield he already thought was his. "You ready, Congresswoman?" he called across the stage. "You've had a week to Google how to spell IQ." The crowd roared. It was choreographed mockery, engineered humiliation. Every laugh, every pause, timed for a primetime audience, hungry for blood. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She adjusted the mic in front of her slowly, then let her hand drop. She wasn't here to parry. She was here to let him swing first and miss so hard the nation would hear it echo. Behind the cameras, her team watched nervously. The producers had changed the lighting cue without warning, flooding Trump in warm tones and casting Jasmine in a pale blue wash. It made her look cold, distant. "They're painting her like a villain," Layla whispered. "She's not just outnumbered, she's outproduced." Jasmine knew. She saw every angle. She watched the monitors, noted the lens choices, the cutaway shots. They weren't filming a debate. They were filming a takedown, a trap wrapped in applause. But they had underestimated something crucial. She wasn't here to play the hero. She was here to set the fire. She leaned back, legs still crossed, hands folded gently over the red folder in her lap, the one she hadn't opened yet, the one everyone forgot about because no one asked what she brought to the summit. All they saw was a woman in a smaller chair. But what happens when the quiet one holds the only thing that can burn the whole set to the ground? The moment Jasmine adjusted her mic to speak, the feed cracked just slightly. A pop of static, then a hiss. To the audience at home, it sounded like background noise. But to Jasmine, it was a message, a warning disguised as a technical glitch. She leaned in again. The sound dropped to a whisper. Her voice came through the speakers like it was underwater. Fuzzy, muted. Trump chuckled into his own mic, crisp and loud, like he was giving a TED Talk. "Maybe she's just not used to the spotlight," he said, smug, letting the words hang. The crowd laughed on cue. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't adjust the mic again. She let the silence linger unbothered. The light above her flickered twice, once hard enough to cast a full shadow across her face. A moment later, a new spotlight kicked in from the right, bleaching her skin, washing her in clinical white. It wasn't just unfair. It was intentional. Backstage, Layla's voice broke through the comms. "They're ghosting her audio," she said. "I'm watching it live. They've rerouted her feed through a limiter." Marcus clenched his fists. They want to make her look small, weak, impaired. But Jasmine didn't look weak. She looked like someone memorizing every inch of the battlefield waiting for the sniper to reveal himself. Trump took another jab. "I thought this was an IQ summit," he quipped, flashing that polished grin. "Not a therapy session." Laughter again. The moderator chuckled politely, then pivoted. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, "would you like to respond?" But her mic didn't pick it up. Only the faint sound of breathing reached the speakers. Still, Jasmine didn't break rhythm. She kept her eyes locked forward, her posture perfect, the red folder resting untouched in her lap like it had a heartbeat. She tilted her head slightly, just enough to let the overhead glare hit one eye, casting the other in shadow. And then finally a slow smile. It wasn't big. It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile you'd see in a courtroom right before an attorney pulls out the one document the defendant thought had been destroyed. It rattled Trump more than any words could have. For a moment, his jaw clenched like he wasn't sure if he was still in control. Backstage, Jasmine's team scrambled for options. "We can go direct to live stream," Layla said. "Override the main feed, patch her mic through our own system." Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. Let them keep thinking she's boxed in. Let them keep building the stage." He paused. "Because when she flips it, it'll all come down on their heads." Jasmine reached forward and gently tapped her mic once. Not to test it, not to complain. Just a reminder that she knew, that she heard what they didn't want her to say. Then she sat back again, legs crossed, eyes still smile untouched. They could dim the lights. They could cut the audio. But they couldn't stop what she was about to reveal. So the real question wasn't how much they'd silenced her, but what were they so desperate to keep the country from hearing? The applause hadn't even died down from Trump's last jab when Jasmine's gaze shifted subtly, purposefully, toward the third row stage right. Her eyes didn't scan the crowd. They locked. One man, one uniform, one silent storm. Sergeant Alan Bridges sat still, too still for a room built on noise. Bronze skin, pressed jacket, regulation haircut. But his chest was bare. No medals, no name tag, no insignia. Just a folded American flag pin and a pair of eyes that looked like they'd stared down fire before and lived to tell no one. Jasmine knew that face. She'd seen it across from her in a closed-door hearing 3 months earlier, voice shaking as he testified about losing his PTSD medication after the VA mysteriously restructured his file. He'd served 19 years, survived 2 tours in Iraq, and returned home to a promise that disappeared with the same ink used to authorize Executive Order 4021A. Now he was here, not backstage, not behind a press badge, but seated with the audience, no camera on him, no microphone near him like the system was trying to pretend he wasn't there. But Jasmine saw him, and more importantly, he saw her. Their eyes met. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just stared with a weight that said, "Don't let him win with the lights. Win with the truth." The crowd around him kept cheering, clapping, whispering. But Bridges didn't move. He sat like a soldier before battle calm locked in and waiting for the shot that would change everything. And Jasmine. She tightened her grip on the red folder just once. That folder didn't just contain spreadsheets or financial transfers. It held his name, his benefits, his testimony sworn certified and buried in a subcommittee report Trump's allies never expected to resurface. She hadn't come here to argue IQ. She'd come to finish what his paperwork couldn't. Trump was still speaking, rambling about his genius test scores and big brain energy. The moderator chuckled again, but Jasmine didn't hear it. Her focus narrowed until all that existed was her chair. And Sergeant Bridges in row 3. A second spotlight flickered. Another mic glitched. The noise grew louder, but so did her certainty. She didn't need to respond yet, not while they thought she was boxed in, not while they laughed and shifted the lights and cut her volume. Because the more they stacked the room against her, the more undeniable the collapse would be when she flipped it all. And Bridges, he would still be watching, waiting. If the room is rigged, when do you stop playing their game and start turning the trap against them? The first round hit like a stage punch, flashy, loud, designed for maximum audience effect. The moderator flashed a toothy grin, gestured to the screen behind them, and announced rapid logic, 60 seconds each. "Let's test the firepower." Trump cracked his knuckles like a boxer stretching before the bell. Jasmine didn't move. The first question dropped like a marble on tile. If 5 machines take 5 minutes to make 5 parts, how long will 100 machines take to make 100 parts? Trump blurted it out before the moderator even finished 5 minutes. The crowd erupted as if someone had just hit a buzzer on a game show. Correct, the host confirmed, nodding. The president shows reflexes that defy his age. The camera cut to Trump's smug smile. He threw a glance toward Jasmine like a man who just drew first blood and wanted her to bleed confidence. She didn't react. The second question was harder, more abstract, something about pattern recognition inside a matrix grid. Trump hesitated for less than a second, then gave an answer with a shrug. Option C, correct again. The screen lit green. Applause swelled like a wave. Jasmine's turn came, and the audio crackled once more. Her answer was precise, her logic flawless. But the mic lagged, and the delay gave her response the illusion of hesitation. Viewers watching from home tweeted, "Why is she stalling? Is she nervous?" It was all misdirection, but optics were weapons now, and the room was rigged with them. Trump leaned into the moment like a showman who knew how to hold the floor. He spun around to face the audience. "She's great at writing tweets," he smirked, "but can she actually solve anything?" The crowd burst into laughter as if intelligence could be measured in punchlines. Backstage, Layla bit her lips so hard she tasted blood. "He's steamrolling the optics," she muttered. Marcus added, "They're handing him the board, giving him time, perfect lighting, reaction shots." Jasmine knew. She was counting the beats. She wasn't trying to win this round. She was baiting him into thinking he had already won the war. The scoreboard ticked. 3 correct for Trump. 2 for Jasmine, 1 marked delayed response, even though she was right. Mr. President leads the summit. The moderator beams, showing the nation the speed of executive thinking. Trump lifted his hand like a champion at a rally. "Fast brain, big brain," he quipped. "Always has been." The red folder on Jasmine's lap remained untouched. But inside it, time was ticking. Documents, evidence, names waiting like explosives with fuses she hadn't lit yet. She wasn't losing. She was luring. Trump mistook the silence as weakness. He mistook the restraint as defeat. And that's exactly how she needed him to feel. Because sometimes the most dangerous strategy isn't to fight back early. It's to let your enemy believe they've already won right before you burn their entire empire down. She waited until the cheers faded and the room reset itself into smug silence. Trump leaned back like a king on his throne, tapping his fingers as if he were waiting for dessert. The moderator shuffled cue cards, already preparing for the next round. That's when Jasmine leaned forward, no smile, no flair, just precision. "Before we continue," she said, voice crisp and surgical, "I'd like 1 minute to raise a question on transparency." Trump chuckled, almost gleeful. She wants to change the subject already, typical. More laughter echoed. But Jasmine didn't even blink. Her index finger hovered over the touchscreen in front of her. 1 tap, 1 click. The entire LED wall behind them changed with a soft mechanical hum. Gone were the IQ graphics and flashy banners. In their place, a sterile white slide titled in bold letters, "VA Retirement Fund Transaction Timeline." The chamber stilled. Even the cameramen held their breath. On screen, a flowchart lit up in red and gold. It showed a transfer of federal veteran pension reserves funds, once protected under federal law, moving into a shadowy firm called Aegis Liberty Holdings, LLC. The chart's arrows continued branching into a second entity, smaller, more concealed, based in Delaware. And then at the end of the line, the text hit like a bullet: majority stakeholder, Robert Kushner. The crowd didn't gasp. It exhaled like a slow-motion implosion. Several audience members shifted forward in their seats. One man whispered, "Wait, is that Jared's brother?" Another said, "Isn't that Trump's family?" Jasmine stood slowly, posture composed, like she'd practiced this exact moment in her mind 100 times. "Just 1 question, Mr. President," she said, her voice reverberating like a courtroom oath. "Why does a firm tied directly to your son-in-law hold $127 million in rerouted veteran pension funds?" Trump's head jerked toward the screen. His hand stopped moving. He opened his mouth, closed it, then shifted in his seat. "That's ridiculous," he muttered. "That's not what this is about." But Jasmine didn't stop. She tapped again. The next slide appeared. Timestamps, emails, approval memos, all pulled from the Office of Federal Budget Control, signatures traced to an official override submitted exactly 4 hours after Executive Order 4021A had mysteriously vanished from the record system. And then the third slide. A blurred document Jasmine now revealed in full resolution, a federal memo approving the privatization of unused VA reserves, co-signed by an acting White House economic advisor. This wasn't accidental, she said. It was deliberate, quiet, hidden behind a fabricated fiscal emergency and disguised under the language of efficiency restructuring. Trump tried to wave it off. None of that proves anything. People move money all the time, but not this money, Jasmine snapped. Not without the people's knowledge. Not while our veterans go without medicine. Not while one of them sits silently in row 3 stripped of his benefits, while your family turns their sacrifice into profit. The moderator sat frozen. No one moved. Not the audience. Not the control room. Even the lights seemed dimmer, like the building itself understood a line had been crossed. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped back, eyes locked on Trump. He stared forward, breathing heavier, now eyes darting toward the moderator, toward the crowd, toward the nearest exit. And she hadn't even opened the folder yet. Because when your enemy builds his empire on paper lies, sometimes all it takes is one real document to bring the whole thing crashing down. The silence that followed Jasmine's revelation wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that thickens the air, heavier than shame, colder than fear. Trump sat stiff, blinking too much. The moderator fumbled with his earpiece, murmuring to someone off screen. But Jasmine didn't move. She simply reached under the table and pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased, worn, and trembling slightly in her fingers. This letter, she began, her voice steady but hushed, was delivered to my office 3 days ago. Its author isn't alive to speak for himself anymore, so today I'll be his voice. She unfolded the paper slowly, like peeling back gauze from a wound. The microphone caught every whisper of movement, and then she read, "You don't know my name. You never shook my hand. But your signature erased my life." The room tensed. Cameras zoomed in on her face. She didn't flinch. "I served in Fallujah. I lost 2 fingers, a brother, and a lung. When I got home, I was told there'd be help, a system, a promise. Instead, I got paperwork, delays, excuses." Trump shifted in his chair. "And then last month, they said my meds weren't covered anymore because the reserve fund was reallocated. That's your word. Mine is stolen." The letter crackled as Jasmine's hand gripped it tighter. A few in the audience had tears in their eyes. Others sat frozen, jaws clenched. "You didn't just steal my care. You stole my wife's peace, my child's security. You stole my life before I had the guts to end it myself." Jasmine folded the letter again tenderly, like it still held breath. She looked up. His name was Sergeant Matthew K. Delaney. He died last week. Gunshot, living room floor. After writing this, the moderator opened his mouth, then closed it again. Trump muttered something inaudible. Jasmine didn't bother to look at him. "He died not because of a war overseas," she said, voice low and pointed. "He died because someone here turned patriotism into profit, because someone gambled with the invisible lives no one televised. No one clapped. No one dared. Even the control room paused all overlays. This wasn't a campaign moment. It wasn't a stunt. It was a rupture." Behind Jasmine, the giant screen now displayed, "Sorry, Ritom." Delaney's photo, his military ID from 15 years ago. Young, hopeful, unaware of the betrayal waiting on the other side of his service. And Trump. He stared at the screen, not angry, not defensive, just still. The kind of still you only see when something lands too close. Because when truth speaks without permission and grief cuts through the noise, what happens next isn't politics, it's reckoning. What happens when truth overrides protocol on live TV? The letter had barely left Jasmine's hands when a soft buzz hit the moderator's earpiece. He flinched, then nodded, barely perceptible. 3 rows behind him, a White House staffer, face-blank clipboard, tucked tight, pressed a button beneath the desk. And just like that, Jasmine's mic died. No static, no warning, just silence. Jasmine leaned forward instinctively, ready to continue, but no sound followed. Her voice moved, but the room heard nothing. Confused murmurs spread like ripples. The camera cut to Trump smiling. His eyes locked on her like a lion watching a net drop. But this wasn't 1998, and the people didn't wait for permission anymore. By the time her mic cut, a young vet in the fourth row had already clipped the suicide letter segment on his phone and uploaded it to TikTok. Within 5 minutes, it was reshared by a former Army medic with 3 million followers. Within 8 minutes, it hit Twitter, now X, with the hashtag #IQGateVetsBetrayed. Within 10 minutes, the control room's monitor lit up with red alerts. Jasmine's silenced voice was echoing louder online than it ever had in that chamber. Back in the hearing room, she didn't panic. She simply tilted her chin up, removed the clip-on mic entirely, and looked straight into the nearest camera. Her lips moved slowly, deliberately, so the nation could still read the truth from her face. A White House press liaison whispered furiously to the director, "Cut to a commercial. Cut to Trump. Cut to anything." Too late. The live stream chat on C-SPAN exploded with comments. "Why is her mic off? We see you. Play it louder." Layla, watching from a staff office 3 floors up, stood up so fast her chair toppled. "They just triggered a Streisand effect," she muttered. Marcus beside her nodded. "They didn't cut her off. They amplified her. It's a digital riot now." Down in the chamber, Trump leaned toward his mic, his still hot mic. "It's unfortunate," he said smugly, "that some people resort to emotional manipulation instead of proving they're smart." The moment he said it, the moderator paled. He knew. Everyone knew. That sentence would not age well, because online Sergeant Delaney's photo was already stitched next to the phrase emotional manipulation and being shared with captions like, "This is what smart destroys." Jasmine Crockett doesn't need a mic to be louder than the president. Somewhere in the control room, someone whispered, "Sir, the live chat just crossed 700,000 active viewers." Another voice followed, "And trending in 12 countries." Jasmine sat still, not defiant, just calm like a storm that had already hit land. Her eyes weren't on Trump anymore. They were locked onto the lens, speaking to America without sound but full of meaning. Because when the truth goes viral faster than power can silence it, what happens when the government's hand hits the mute button too late? She didn't wait for her mic to come back. She didn't ask for permission. She simply stood up, lifted the slim encrypted tablet from her seat, and walked calmly, deliberately toward the center monitor. Trump was mid-sentence, tossing out lines about fake outrage and budget reallocations, but his words landed flat. The nation had already heard the letter. Now it was ready for numbers. "Since my voice was cut," Jasmine said, turning to face the camera, "I'll let the numbers speak instead." She tapped the tablet once. Behind her, the LED wall flared to life again, this time with a spreadsheet so large the font had to shrink to fit all the rows. Names, military IDs, states, dates. 42-13 entries. Each line told the same story: a veteran who'd lost access to their full benefits since Executive Order 4021A had disappeared. The chamber didn't make a sound. Even the moderator forgot to breathe. This, Jasmine continued, is the full list of former service members whose disability stipends or medical coverage were either delayed, slashed, or terminated within the last 90 days. All traced to the same administrative loophole, the one created by the so-called emergency override. Trump shifted again, but this time it wasn't theatrical. It was uncomfortable, because even from his seat he could see the names. Some highlighted in red, some marked deceased. Jasmine swiped again, and a government document filled the screen. A memo from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The digital watermark read, "Classified, do not release to public." But someone had. Before they removed this from the archive, she said, "We secured a snapshot. It proves the pilot program for privatizing VA funds began 6 months before the order was signed." This wasn't an accident. It was a blueprint. A flicker of panic crossed the moderator's face. "Ms. Crockett, we're not cleared to." She cut him off with a glance sharp enough to draw blood. "Is the country not cleared to know how its heroes were betrayed? Is that the kind of intelligence we're measuring today?" The room stayed silent. Trump finally grabbed his mic, voice rising. "This is an ambush. This was supposed to be a debate, an IQ challenge, not a witch hunt." Jasmine didn't respond. Instead, she walked to the front of the stage, stood beneath the towering list of names, and stared directly into the camera. "These aren't numbers. their stories, their funerals no one filmed, their phone calls no one returned. They are the receipts of neglect signed with silence. The live stream comment section began flooding. My uncle's name is there. My sister's ID is on that list. This isn't a game. One name, then two, then dozens recognized. Jasmine had done more than expose a policy, she made the system personal. And once people see their reflection in a scandal, they don't look away. Because when justice goes silent and grief gets buried in spreadsheets, what happens when someone finally brings the dead back into the room? The room had already been cracked wide open, but what happened next split it down the spine. Third row seat C12. Sergeant Alan Bridges rose without a word. The ribbons on his chest shimmered under the studio lights, but his expression was stone. His boots echoed as he walked forward, cutting across the aisle like a verdict in motion. Every camera turned to follow him. Even Trump's voice trailed off mid-sentence, unsure if this was part of the show. Bridges didn't speak, not at first. He stopped at the moderator's table, unpinned the Purple Heart from his jacket with a slow, steady hand, and placed it on the glass desk between Jasmine and Trump. The metal didn't clink. It thudded like a dropped gavel. Then his voice broke through the silence. Rough, hoarse, but aimed like a sniper round. He didn't lose a war, Bridges said, never once looking at the president. He sold the people who fought it. Trump's face tightened, but he stayed still. I got this, Bridges gestured to the metal, for catching shrapnel in my back, trying to drag my lieutenant out of a burning Humvee in Kandahar. I didn't scream then. I didn't cry when they amputated my leg. But I cried when the VA sent me a letter saying my medication would be reevaluated due to executive redirection. I cried when my daughter asked why I was screaming in my sleep again. He turned to the crowd. And now I cry watching brothers like Sergeant Delaney get buried because someone in this room wanted a bigger yacht. Jasmine didn't blink. She stood still, letting the truth breathe. The moderator leaned forward, clearly unsure whether to intervene. His hand hovered near his earpiece again, but this time he didn't touch it, because the audience had risen too. Slowly, veterans in the back rows stood. Some removed their caps. Others crossed their arms. Not a single one looked at Trump. The Purple Heart sat like an indictment, gleaming beneath the overhead lights. Trump stared at it but didn't reach. This isn't about smarts, Bridges said. It's about memory, honor, decency. All the things we're told matter more than IQ when you're sent to war. But I guess they don't matter when you're trying to privatize what's left of us. Trump finally grabbed his mic again. Sir, I appreciate your service, but no one heard the rest, because someone in the back clapped, then another. Then it spread, quiet at first, then thunderous. Applause not for drama, not for politics, but for a man who put down his medal like a challenge coin at the feet of corruption. Bridges nodded to Jasmine, once brief, respectful, then turned and limped back to his seat. And Jasmine finally spoke again, her voice low. You don't measure intelligence by how fast someone answers a trivia question. You measure it by how deeply they understand the cost of silence. The cameras caught Trump swallowing hard, because in that moment, surrounded by medals, names, and grief, he wasn't facing Jasmine anymore. He was facing the nation. When even the uniform turns its back, what defense remains? The Purple Heart still sat on the desk like a loaded weapon, but it wasn't the metal that detonated the room. It was what Trump did next. He lunged forward in his seat, fists slamming against the armrests, and roared into the mic like a man watching his empire slip through his hands. This is a setup, he bellowed, face reddening like a slow boil. You planted this vet. She's a fraud, a fake, a prop with a law degree. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood as if already expecting the outburst, like a seasoned fighter who knows when the opponent's punch is coming too wide, too desperate. If I'm fake, she said slowly, reaching into her folder, then explained this signature. She slid a paper across the glass table, face up, angled for the cameras. The seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs shone faintly in the corner. Across the middle, executive order, Fort Woody 1A, and at the bottom, unmistakably in black ink, Donald J. Trump. The moderator froze. The cameraman instinctively zoomed in. This isn't a copy, Jasmine said, voice ice over fire. It's the original signatory document, pulled from the Office of Legal Counsel before it was scrubbed. It has your ink, your fingerprint, and your timestamp. She paused just long enough for the weight of those words to settle, then added almost too softly to catch as someone inside still believes in the Constitution. And they left this in a plain envelope, no return address, no note, just truth. Trump's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jasmine stepped closer. You didn't just know about the cuts, you authorized them. Signed off on a Friday at 6:32 p.m. after a private dinner with the CEO of Aegis Liberty, who for the record is also your daughter's father-in-law. The temperature in the room plummeted. A young assistant at the edge of the set whispered to another, "This is perjury-level exposure." The other replied, "This isn't a hearing anymore. It's a televised indictment." Trump tried to recover, standing now, jabbing a finger toward Jasmine. "This was stolen. You hacked it. You're colluding with foreign data moles or the deep state," or she cut him off. "Sir," she said, lifting another sheet, "here is the flight log from that dinner. And here's the financial memo showing the transfer of $3. $2 million into Aegis Liberty's Cayman account, 24 hours later." Every monitor in the studio lit up with overlays, charts, scans, receipts. It was no longer just an argument, it was a collapse. Trump's face twisted. His lips curled back like he wanted to say something so venomous it would burn through concrete. But all that came out was a rasped, "This is war." Jasmine leaned in so the mic caught every syllable. "No, Mr. President, this is America finally watching." The audience sat frozen, no applause, no boos. Just the thick electric silence of a country realizing the emperor's clothes weren't just missing, they were shredded and sold. And Trump for the first time looked like he might bolt from the stage. Because when your only defense is to scream fake louder than the evidence, what happens when the ink on the page screams louder than you? The air was already thick with something heavier than silence. It wasn't just scandal, now it was criminal architecture peeled back layer by layer on live television. Jasmine took one breath, not to steady herself, but to give the country a second to catch up. Then she tapped her tablet. The screen behind her blinked, and the final wall collapsed. Projected for millions to see a scanned contract, watermarked, dated, authenticated. On the left side of the screen, Trump Organization. On the right, Red River Capital Holdings, LLC. And dead center in bold black letters was the figure that froze the room. $13.2 billion. Jasmine didn't speak right away. She let the number hang like a noose over the stage. The moderator shifted in his chair, waiting for an earpiece cue that never came. Everyone was waiting for someone to lie first. Then Jasmine said, voice level and clear, "This contract was signed 4 days after Executive Order 40T1A, the same order that quietly rerouted veteran pension funds. This number didn't vanish into thin air. It moved strategically." She swiped again. A diagram took over the screen, clean arrows, sharp labels. Federal Pension Reserve to Aegis Liberty, to Red River Capital, to Trump Organization's offshore subsidiary. Each arrow told a story. Each label was a locked drawer now flung open. "This isn't speculation," Jasmine continued. "Red River Capital is a Delaware-registered financial intermediary controlled through 3 blind trusts. We followed the chain. All 3 link back to unlisted real estate assets under the Trump Organization's umbrella." Trump shifted, face red, mouth ready. "This is fake," he barked, standing. "This whole thing is a fraud. You made this up with your little team of interns." But Jasmine's voice rose above him. "The U.S. Treasury Compliance Office confirmed the contract's chain of custody using its own notarization timestamp system. What you called a restructuring was in fact a redirection. You didn't lose the money, you redirected it into yourself." The crowd recoiled. Phones came out. Hashtags were born in real time. Number 13.2 wasn't just a scandal now, it was a war drum. Jasmine stepped closer to the cameras. "This isn't about intelligence. This is about arrogance. The belief that no one would trace the money because no one believed they could." Trump tried again, stumbling forward, finger raised. "You don't even understand how high-level capital movement works." "And yet," Jasmine interrupted, "you understood exactly where to sign. Your initials appear 3 times, one on the order, one on the transfer, one on the payoff." The screen behind her flashed those signatures in sequence, pulsing against a black background, and then she said it low and slow. "You thought the cameras would distract us from the contracts, But the camera never forgets. The room fell into stunned quiet, because when the final connection is clean, cold, and undeniable, there is no more debating. There is only exposure and judgment. The applause had barely faded when a quiet tremor passed through the back of the room. A woman stood, simple blouse, faded jeans, graying hair pulled into a low, trembling bun. No credentials, no security clearance, just something stronger presence. Jasmine turned, and for the first time all morning her shoulders dropped. It was Mary Dalton, the widow of Sergeant Allen Bridges. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't need it. As the camera zoomed in and the stage lights adjusted, Mary stepped forward with slow, deliberate steps. Each one seemed heavier than the last, like she was walking through something thicker than air, through grief itself. She paused beside Jasmine, not to speak with her, but to look out at the crowd, at the lawmakers and news anchors and all the polished shoes that had stepped over stories like hers. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. My husband served this country for 24 years, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He lost hearing in one ear and a piece of his lung, but he never complained. Not once. She blinked hard, fighting the burn behind her eyes. What broke him wasn't war. It was being erased. Silence blanketed the room again. But it wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Mary reached into her purse and pulled out a folded letter, the same one Jasmine had read earlier. I didn't come here for revenge. I came because this letter wasn't supposed to exist. He never wanted the world to see him weak, but I think he'd want it now. Because weakness isn't failing to survive. It's pretending nothing is broken. She turned toward Jasmine. My husband died, but she gave him back a voice. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes shimmered, but her hands were still, strong, listening. Trump muttered something under his breath, but the microphones didn't bother to catch it. They were already focused on Mary and the folded purple heart still sitting on the desk like a silent accusation. Mary walked over to that small tarnished metal. She touched it once. Then she looked directly into the main camera and asked clear as day, is this what loyalty earns in America now? No one answered. The moderator shuffled his notes. Someone in the gallery coughed. But Mary didn't wait for approval. She nodded once to Jasmine, then turned and walked away, her figure shrinking as she returned to the crowd. No applause. No spotlight. Just truth and silence. And maybe that was the real blow. Because in a room full of suits and scripts and noise, one widow's voice had pierced it all. What if the real battlefield was here all along? It happened without warning. 1 second, the image of Mary Dalton's retreating figure filled screens across America. The next, millions of televisions blinked to black. No fade out, no transition, just a flat digital gasp and then silence. On Fox News, the broadcast was gone. In its place, a cheerful jingle and an anchor awkwardly pivoting to breaking economic updates. But the damage was done. Hashtags exploded within 60 seconds. Feed cut. Silence is guilt. What are they hiding? Because elsewhere the story kept breathing raw and uncensored. MSNBC didn't blink. YouTube streams bootleg from 5 different angles surged in views like a tidal wave, crashing into the firewalls of denial. 32 million Americans were now watching live, watching Jasmine, watching Trump, watching every word not meant to be heard. In a dim studio control room somewhere, a Fox News producer slammed a fist against the console. We're losing the narrative, he muttered. But outside the booth, the narrative was already gone. Untethered, viral, alive. Jasmine knew it. She didn't even flinch when the studio lights flickered. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing like a sniper locking target. Cutting the feed doesn't cut the facts, she said slowly, letting the microphone hum with tension. This country isn't a television set. You can't mute a reckoning. Trump scoffed. But even he was checking the screens now, seeing the ripple through his own war room in real time. His staff looked like chess pieces, suddenly realizing the board had tilted. Cameras still rolling. Jasmine raised a slim black flash drive. Since they're worried about what you see, let's show you something they tried to bury. A tap on her tablet. A new feed replaced the last one. Surveillance footage. A closed-door meeting inside the Department of Veteran Affairs. There he was, Jared Kushner, leaning over a leather chair, whispering to a lobbyist from Red River Capital. Behind them, a wall-sized spreadsheet with 3 words circled in red: pension allocation strategy. The crowd didn't gasp. They inhaled and forgot how to breathe. Backstage aides scrambled like fire ants. Trump's lawyer pulled at his collar. One assistant nearly tripped on a wire. But Jasmine stayed still, calm. Her voice was now steel wrapped in velvet. You cut the cameras, but the truth doesn't need your permission to show up. The moderator didn't dare interrupt. Phones lit up the audience like a constellation of disbelief. Screenshots flooded every social platform faster than algorithms could catch up. Grandma in Kansas, teenager in Brooklyn, a nurse on break in Detroit. They were all watching now, not just a hearing, but a reckoning unspooling in real time. In that moment, Jasmine wasn't just a congresswoman. She was the firewall, and she'd just become the most watched woman in America. The stream was still live when the first warning came. A sharp ping lit up Jasmine's encrypted tablet, not from her staff, not from press, but directly from a long silent DOJ contact. No greeting, no preamble, just 2 cold lines: OIG initiated. You are now under internal review. She stared at the screen, pulse rising. Her fingers tightened around the tablet just slightly, like it had turned into evidence in her own trial. The words weren't just a warning. They were a threat dressed as protocol. Behind her, Layla's voice cracked. They're circling. Marcus looked pale. If you walk out that door now. He paused, breath short. Will there be cameras or cuffs waiting? Jasmine didn't answer, but her stillness said everything. This wasn't fear. It was calculation. She was weighing the cost not of the lie, but of the truth she had just set loose. Backstage staffers were already gathering in huddles like anxious birds sensing a storm. Whispers shot through Capitol Hill like static down a frayed wire. The message spreading from office to office wasn't official, but everyone felt its weight. The Department of Justice was preparing to turn the lens around. On her, on Jasmine Crockett. They called it overreach, improper disclosure, national security compromise. But she knew the truth. They weren't trying to protect the country. They were trying to protect him, the man behind the desk who had just been caught selling out the very people waving flags for him outside. That night, an anonymous chain email was forwarded to dozens of Republican lawmakers. Subject line: hold. Just that. Inside a single sentence: do not move. Let her bury herself. It had no signature, no logo. Just the kind of silence that screams louder than threats. Jasmine's chief of staff paced the hallway, voice tight. They're baiting you. They want an emotional move. They want a misstep on live TV. Jasmine didn't answer right away. Her hands were folded again, like they were before the broadcast began. Same stillness. But now behind her eyes, something darker brewed. I'm not here to survive this, she finally said. I'm here to finish it. That silence on the Hill. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Democrats distanced themselves. Independents looked at the floor. Republicans grinned in corners. Only one person walked straight into her office that night, Representative Luis Ortega, a veteran's son from Arizona. He placed a single file on her desk. This isn't over, he said. But they're about to make you the villain in your own story. She opened the folder. Inside were screenshots from Homeland Security doctored edits of her speech headlines ready to run the next morning. Crockett leaks military intel, one read. Another: worse Congresswoman aides foreign hack. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she opened a new document, titled it in bold: Response Protocol Phase 2. If they want a villain, she said quietly, they better be ready for a final act. Outside the Capitol, protesters were already gathering, but not against her. They carried signs that read, Truth has a name, and she did not fold. Her name was trending again, but now with fire beside it. And somewhere in the West Wing, Trump's advisor whispered behind a closed door, why didn't we shut her down sooner? But the question they should have asked was, what happens when the target stops running and starts aiming back? It started with a whisper in a marble hallway. A single text passed between 2 GOP senators during a private lunch at the Capitol. He's gone too far. That whisper became a spark, and by morning it had set fire to the walls the party had spent years building to protect its crown. At exactly 10:03 a.m., 7 Republican senators stood shoulder to shoulder in front of a sea of microphones. No Fox News logos, no MAGA caps, just pale faces, tight jaws, and a podium that looked heavier than it should. Senator Mallory Griggs of Utah, a military widow and lifelong conservative, stepped forward first. This is not about politics anymore. She began, voice thin but steady. This is about betrayal. Behind her, Senator Owens, a fiscal hawk from Ohio, held up a manila folder. This contains enough redacted documents to shame 3 administrations. But only one signed them all. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. Reporters leaned in like vultures smelling blood. Jasmine watched from her office live stream playing on mute. The silence was deafening. Her staff sat frozen. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and whispered, "Finally." Back at the press conference, the moment cracked wide open when Senator Marcus Till from Texas, a man known more for hunting bills than headlines, dropped the line no one expected. "We demand a fully independent investigation. No partisan filter, no DOJ shielding. If the president has nothing to hide, he can prove it under oath." Reporters exploded into questions, but the senators didn't stay. They said what needed to be said, then walked off like a jury delivering a sentence. In that 30-second exit, America saw something it hadn't seen in years: Republicans breaking ranks not for power, but for truth. By noon, the party cracks was trending on every major platform. Cable news hosts stumbled over themselves trying to adjust their narratives. Analysts scrambled to count the vote margins if impeachment were back on the table. And behind closed doors, Trump raged. He slammed his desk. "Griggs is finished. I want files on every one of them." His aides nodded, but they knew this was no longer a controllable fire. This was collapse, and it was televised. Inside her hearing room, Jasmine picked up her pen again, scribbled something on the back of her notes. Just one sentence. The only way out is through. The real shock wasn't the documents, or the slide deck, or the Purple Heart. It was this: the moment loyalty snapped under the weight of truth. The termites in the wall finally bit back. And the question now was no longer whether Trump would fall. It was how many others he would take with him before the ground gave way. The room was carved from silence. Studio lights bathed the desk in presidential gold, but the man seated behind it looked anything but radiant. Donald Trump's tie sat crooked against a wrinkled shirt, and his hands, usually animated, commanding, were motionless. The seal of the United States shimmered behind him on the CBS broadcast, but his gaze avoided the camera. It was not a speech. It was surrender. 3 weeks ago, he began, voice raw. "I issued a challenge I thought I couldn't lose. I said I'd resign if I lost a public IQ duel. Turns out it wasn't about IQ. She didn't beat me in intellect. She beat me in something more dangerous: truth." America held its breath. In diners, airports, living rooms, bars, screens glowed, and the nation leaned in. Jasmine watched from the hearing chamber, arms folded, surrounded by veteran staffers and 1,000 unspoken memories. She didn't blink, didn't smile. She knew this wasn't victory. This was a consequence. Trump's fingers fumbled with a sheet of paper. No flags, no grand seal, just a typed resignation. One line above the signature read, "Effective immediately." He glanced once at the camera, eyes sunken but defiant. "History will judge me," he muttered. "But today I walk away before it chains me." With that, he signed. No applause followed, only a soft click as microphones were cut. Then the seal faded to black. Outside the White House, chaos bloomed in waves. Protesters screamed. Supporters sobbed. Helicopters cut through the overcast sky like vultures circling a battlefield. And in the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, not behind a podium, not in the spotlight, but among the people. No victory speech, no press tour, just quiet presence. Senator Griggs called her that evening. No pleasantries, just 2 words: "You won?" Jasmine answered with 3. The country did. In the hours that followed, hashtags surged like aftershocks. IQ Gate turned into Truth Won. She Did Not Fold trended alongside Vet Justice Now. Pundits fumbled to keep up. But for millions watching, they didn't need commentary. They saw it. They lived it. And somewhere in a quiet wing of Bethesda Naval Hospital, Mary Dalton, widow of the soldier whose letter had stopped the room, stood in front of her husband's photo and whispered, "He heard you." But the real story wasn't a resignation. It was what Jasmine proved, that in a country cracking under weight and noise, truth could still make someone powerful enough to walk out of frame and never return. And when the cameras finally went dark, the only question left echoing across America was what happens now that the lie is gone and the truth finally speaks alone. No speech, no statement, no raised fist. When the hearing adjourned and the cameras flickered off, Jasmine Crockett didn't wait for applause or questions. She simply stood, straightened her jacket, and walked out through the side corridor, alone, heels clicking like a metronome, marking the end of something greater than a presidency. Capitol Security offered to escort her. She waved them off with a glance. Behind her, the chamber still smelled of sweat and static and truth. Ahead of her, the hallway curved into shadow, empty of reporters, free of flash. Only a janitor paused, hand on his mop, eyes wide with something unspoken. Jasmine gave him a nod. It was enough. Outside, the wind had shifted. The air was colder now, quieter, as if the nation itself had exhaled. Jasmine reached the sidewalk and kept walking. No limo, no entourage. Just a quiet congresswoman unknown to most a year ago now, etched into the nerves of a country trying to remember its soul. By the time she reached the corner of Constitution Avenue, her phone vibrated. Once, then again, then so fast it trembled in her palm. She didn't stop to check it until a call came in from her assistant, Kay. Jasmine answered. How many, she asked. Kay's voice cracked. 43,000 emails in 2 hours from vets, nurses, moms, even a few Republicans. Jasmine, they're calling you a mirror. Jasmine didn't reply. She just stood there, letting the cold bite into her coat, watching a mother cross the street with her toddler, unaware of the tectonic shift that had just cracked Washington's spine. A street musician began to play something soft on the saxophone. Jasmine turned and walked on. Somewhere behind her, a Fox News anchor was trying to reframe the resignation as orchestrated manipulation. Somewhere else, MSNBC played the suicide letter again, the host tearing up on air. But Jasmine didn't hear any of it. Her mind was elsewhere, on a worn photo tucked inside her wallet. Her father in uniform, a folded flag, a promise. She reached the reflecting pool and paused. The Lincoln Memorial loomed across the waterstone, cold and silent. She stared at it for a long time. You told the truth, she whispered, almost like prayer. Now I have too. That night, her inbox passed $100,000. Her name hit trending lists in 22 countries. And yet she slept on her old couch, the TV off her phone, face down, her breath finally steady. Because it wasn't about fame. It was about walking into a storm and coming out whole. And the question whispered on every screen across America wasn't about politics anymore. It was this: if Jasmine Crockett walked through fire alone, what would we do when it's our turn? The photo was grainy, but it didn't matter. It showed a single object resting in the center of an old oak table, Sergeant Bridges' Purple Heart, its ribbon gently curled like a sleeping flag, placed beside a folded letter, creased from too many rereadings. No caption, no music, just the image broadcast silently across millions of screens the morning after the resignation. On the other side of the table sat Mary Dalton, staring at the metal with wet eyes and unmoving hands. She didn't cry. Not now. She had done enough of that in the hospital hallway, in the funeral parlor, in the months of silence that followed. But in this moment, on this day, her grief was no longer just personal. It had become a ledger, a reckoning. Networks played the clip like a funeral march. This wasn't about being smart, Jasmine had said the night before, standing quietly behind a podium, no longer hers. This was about being brave. And America listened, not just with ears, but with memory. Across the country, veterans posted photos of themselves with missing legs, folded flags, rejection letters from the VA. One caption read, "We gave everything. She gave us back our names." Schools began replaying the full hearing as a civics lesson. In barbershops and diners, people debated not about Trump's fall, but Jasmine's rise. At the Library of Congress, someone left a sticky note next to the exhibit on American conflict. It read, "Update this. The war wasn't just overseas, and still the Purple Heart and the suicide letter sat untouched on that oak table, frozen in time, A still life of sacrifice and betrayal, and now finally recognition. Some said the nation had been tricked. Others called it theater. But for those who had watched with their hearts and not just their politics, the truth was clearer than any news feed. Heroes weren't always the ones with stars on their collars or flags behind their names. Sometimes they were women in sharp blazers, or soldiers without pensions, or mothers with shaking hands who stood anyway. And in that still frame, the medal, the letter, the silence. America didn't just see what had happened. It saw who it had almost forgotten. Sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms or rise from battlefields. They simply dare to speak the truth, even when it means standing alone. In a nation where power often overshadows compassion, it's the quiet courage that wakes a country up. What do you believe makes a true hero in today's America? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story stirred something in you, don't just scroll. Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Truth Stories, where silence is shattered and truth finds a voice. Tap the bell, because the next story may not just expose corruption, it may awaken a nation. What part of Jasmine's stand will stay with you long after the screen goes dark? Tell us in the comments, because remembering isn't enough unless we remember together. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to listen and someone bold enough to speak.